And just let that sink in for a moment. They're basically saying, I am prepared to do this 10 times, 100 times, and take on the cost of doing that rather than teaching someone how to do it, which will maybe take one or two iterations of doing it. Back to Cardcast, the podcast where Milan and I pick a card at random from a deck of cards just like this. A deck of cards that Milan conceived of, designed of, and produced. We shuffle the pack, choose a card at random from the pack, and that's what we talk about in the podcast. So let's shuffle the deck and see what pops out.
We have a club card. So clubs are all around mindset, and I think that all about mindset. And I think this one is really, really good example of switching a mindset of, early stage CEO or founder CEO. Well, I know some doing this for decades and they still haven't made that switch. So maybe early stage is not that great. On the other hand, their companies have tendency to be still in early stages even after those decades. So, what is the cause? What is the consequence? Anyway, this card is about hiring an assistant. I suggest that quite often, and almost all the time or almost every time I get either one or a collection of excuses from pretty much the same list, right? Like, we're too small for it, can't afford it, too much for a cash flow. It feels like I shouldn't have one because, I'm not that kind of CEO, or it's an ego thing. Like, the only assholes have assistants, all of that stuff, right? Have you ever run into any of that?
Yeah, pretty much the same excuses. There's many more. Some people have just said to me, you know what, I'm terrible at delegating, so why would I have an assistant? And that to me just opens up a whole can of other questions because, as a CEO, your job is to delegate. Well, it's not delegate, but your job is to get people to want to do what needs to be done. And that is just delegation in another form, really.
Yeah. So your answer is, so you're enjoying being the bottleneck. Okay, fantastic. Good for you. Then why am I here?
Yep. Someone once said to me, if you don't have an assistant, you are an assistant. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's good. I like that.
Yeah, pretty much. It's in the same vein of if your business depends on you, you don't have a business, you have a job, right?
Right. Yeah.
And a
Mhm.
terrible job because your boss is a lunatic, but that's a different story. So let's talk about why is it so important to get over this hump, this mental barrier of, what, it might not be a bad idea to, as Don Martel would say, buy back some of your time, and really, getting an assistant, and let's say the word assistant, but it could be any kind of titles at that point. Basically, somebody to take over things that are not the best use of your time. Of course, you can, spend extra couple of hours on email every day. Of course, you can do that. Of course, you can book your own travel. Of course, you can, figure out the tickets or figure out a reservation for a restaurant that you will take your client in the following day. All of those things you can do, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. For one big reason, think about what you could do instead if you didn't have to do it,
This is an
right?
opportunity cost thing, isn't it? The money you're paying out to an assistant could be the time that represents could be far, far better spent doing more high value, productive work.
Yeah, exactly. So let's think in terms of ROI, right? Like, what would it cost you to hire somebody who can do a high level task at precisely actually the same level of quality and output as you can? Because that's what you're doing, right? The fact that you hire somebody to do something so you don't have to means that you can have one more sales call. You can prepare better for your board meeting. You can, spend more time on coaching your second in command, like whatever that is. You know, whatever are those things that only you can do for the organization. And ultimately, even if you use that hour sleeping, and instead of 4 hours you sleep five, the return of investment it's still massive, right? And people just don't understand that. That really, going back to Dan Martell, this is not about luxury. This is not about hiring somebody. This is about buying back your time so you can repurpose it for something that is of higher value to the organization or yourself. And that's it. That's all there is to it, really. And the assistant type of work is usually the easiest, the biggest leverage because it takes the stuff from the bottom, so you can do more of the salesy and all of that stuff. And people just don't understand it. Like, it's easy to do it. Why would I hire somebody else? Because it's easy to do it. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Specifically
Yeah,
because.
yeah. I recently recorded a podcast uh, on buy back your time, and with Peter Oxley,
Oh, nice.
and he used an expression that I really loved. And if you don't have assistants, you are robbing the company of money because you're drawing a CEO's salary and doing an administrator's job. So you're robbing the company of money. You're robbing your own company by not having an assistant.
Mhm.
And we all hear the same excuses for why people don't have an assistant. And I know you iterated through them at the beginning, and there's many more. But there is something that blocks people from bringing on an assistant. Now, there is something that they just can't conceptually get their head around the value of bringing an assistant. What do you think that is? I mean, I have my own idea, but what do you think that one block is?
Well, very often when I talk to them, they already spent every cent in their operating budget and they're seeing this an additional spend rather than as a replacement or as an investment with very big. So sometimes it's a cash constraint, which really comes back to poor planning, right? Uh, so that is usually the one hard thing that tells me not yet, right? That means, okay, we need to get through the race or we need to do it. But then you will do it right away, right? you know, get the accountability on that. I think that's the one reason that I hear when I give people a temporary pass on that. Um, what did you have in mind?
Yeah, the reason I hear, and this is the most often quoted reason, is I don't have time to teach them what I do. And just let that sink in for a moment. They're basically saying, I am prepared to do this 10 times, 100 times, and take on the cost of doing that rather than teaching someone how to do it, which will maybe take one or two iterations of doing it. So then they're never in a position where they incrementally start freeing up their time. So they're the ones who are working 80 hours a week, and 40 of those is doing the administrator's job, the assistant's job. And that's a conceptual barrier that's very hard to push through. And if you can't, there's probably a red flag that they're probably not going to be particularly coachable as well, uh, because if they're not prepared to take on that learning, if they're not prepared to take on that change of behavior, those really hard changes of behavior that they're going to be asked to do down the track. No chance. No
You know what's
chance.
you know what's really funny though is that the same CEO, especially if they're techie, is willing to spend an extra 4 hours a day playing with AI to see whether you can automate something. And that's not the wrong thing. Don't please, it's just that it's exactly the same thing. It's an investment into a process, whether it's automatic or human. The principles are exactly the same. You still need to, come up with a standard operating procedure because you cannot delegate or automate something that isn't defined. The advantage is that in case of the human, you have a new problem solver, like, and then you can literally just talk, "Hey, I just need this outcome," and they will figure out the details. And yes, AI is doing a lot of that too. But uh, the principles are very similar. Is that you have to spend some time to save a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
And it might take you 2 hours to save 15-minute transaction, but that 15 minute happens every week or every day or twice a week. So the return on investment is counted in days generally on these type of things. And when you get a good assistant or good EA, chances are they already know a bunch of these things better than you do. Like you
Yeah.
think you're unique in most of those tasks, you're not.
Yeah.
Right? It's just the reality.
I have a situation with a client right now that is exactly that. He's got right into EA, and he's loving what AI, and he's loving what AI can do. And he's stopped doing his job. Yeah, he has stopped doing his job as a CEO, and he's now, knee deep in working through AI products and solutions that might benefit his business in the long run. And I'm saying to him and the leadership team, like, you should not be spending your time doing this. And the leadership team are backing him up, saying, "Oh, what he's doing is brilliant." And I said, "Yes, but he's not doing his job. He's
Yeah.
doing your job. So if he's doing your job, what job are you doing, and why are you being paid? And who's doing the CEO's job? Because from what I can see, no one's doing it."
Yeah, exactly. No, that happens very much. It's not bad. Like if this is where your heart is, then promote yourself to VP of R&D and find a new
Yes.
CEO. That's good, right? Nothing wrong with that.
Well, that's where we're going. Yeah.
Or make it as a part of your visionary scorecard and find an operator, or elevate an operator who will keep the company going. Okay? Because I will never stop somebody from going where they naturally want to put their energy in, because chances are that they will progress in the direction faster. But I cannot abandon the other stuff. Like if you accountable for the health of the organization, you need to think about succession in that.
So we've mentioned AI a few times, and these days we can't really talk about bringing on assistants without talking about AI as well. So, in your mind, where is the divide between what a CEO can do or should do, what an assistant can and should do, and how can we leverage AI to maximize what AI does in this world? Do you have an approach as to how that gets separated out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I would want to hire an assistant who is very familiar and very experienced in using AI, and they have the mind of the AI architect themselves. Because, and then if they're lazy, even better, right? Because if I can go and say, hey, this is what I need, and they say, okay, this is what I can do, or this is what I can have AI do, like fantastic, like everybody wins, right? Yet again, why would I, as a CEO, need to burden myself with those decisions where we need to figure out the strategy of the organization, or the next big partnership, or the next big move in the IP space, like the things that really truly nobody else can do. So that's pretty much it. Like you look at the process, and frankly, if you have a good agentic system implemented in the organization, then chances are that those agents themselves will tell you, yeah, you should have a human do this show. Right? This is not great. It's smart enough these days to even tell you when it's not smart enough to do something, and not flexible enough, or the problem is not defined well enough, and so on and so on.
So if you were to say to someone who doesn't have an assistant, you need to get an assistant, what would the rationale, or what would be the justification for that?
Just give them buy back your time to read, and see what they say after they do. Right? That's
But they haven't
simple
got
as
enough
that.
time to read Buy Back Your Time. They're too busy to read Buy Back Your Time.
They often are, aren't they?
Yep, yep. So, closing out the episode, if you don't have an assistant, you should get yourself an assistant. If you don't have an assistant, you are robbing the business of money, because you're doing work that is way, way, way below your pay grade. And if you take one thing away from this episode, think of one thing that you could delegate to an assistant to free up some of your time back in your day. And when you've done that, think of another thing, and then think of another thing. But
Mhm.
most of all, get an assistant.
And I think that the important thing is this is actually one of the first hires you can make, because you're probably not ready to hand off sales to somebody. You're probably not ready to head and end of R&D, but you can definitely hand off calendar management, setting up meetings, doing the logistics, doing all of those things around that. So look for things that are the lowest value on your list in terms of what you're doing, in terms of, they're necessary. So, that's the value is there, of course. But in terms of the alternative, what else could you do in the meantime? And you start chopping it off. And it very often starts with an assistant.